Okay, so 10 years ago, almost to this day, where did Yasser go? I saw him lurking a second ago. There's Yasser. Yasser and I had the pleasure of being Steve 10 years ago to start the first Keep Austin Agile. So we were on the board and we said, let's do it. And we had this extra money and we were like, what do we do with it? We could throw a conference. And then we made $1,000. So we, let's do another conference. And then here we are, 10 years later, still doing the conference. So excited to be here, excited to share with y'all a little bit of my story and a little bit of things that I've learned along the way. So I'm going to share kind of 5 different stages of agile leader that I was, or maybe not so agile in some of the early ones, some key lessons along the way. And if I think back to my leadership journey, it started with my dad when I was in middle school. He started his own company when I was in middle school, his own consulting company in a different, not Agile. Agile didn't exist yet, in the energy area. And I learned a lot from that. I just grew up in middle school, high school with like what it means to be an entrepreneur, what it means to be your own boss, what it means to lead other people and the responsibility that that bears. And I knew by the time I exited high school, I wanted to start a company one day, right? That was kind of became my life mission. Now, I went to University of Texas. That was a cue, Eric. Yeah, all right. And when I graduated, I started a development job, got a development degree, and within 6 months, I was moved into a management position. You know how much training I got? Yeah, 0. Same amount y'all probably got, right? And said, like, go lead people. And I was like, yeah, thanks for the raise. Like, I'm gonna, and this responsibility. And I was naive and cocky and like, I could do it and just jumped right into it. But that kind of leader, we call an expert leader, where like, I'll just do it myself. It's just easier for me to do myself. I just loaded everything on my shoulders, and most of the communication, when I think back to that, we didn't really have a team, right? It was really me saying, hey, can you do this? Hey, can you do that? Delegating tasks, not delegating mission or objectives, right? But I was just trying to get everything done, and I was in the middle of everything. And it was fun. It was challenging, and I got a lot out of that, but that wasn't really the best leader, right? And so from there, the next opportunity I had to lead was a kind of scaling startup here in Austin. And I had a team, and this was the first team that I learned Agile. We started doing Agile things. This was around 2003, and this was back in the day when the people who introduced Agile at the company were the developers. Does that happen in your company? That's where the thrust of like, let's do Agile, let's do process. It all comes from your developers, right? No, not so much. But back then it was like, hey, I heard this thing about user stories in a daily stand-up, and there weren't a whole lot of books in 2003 on how to do this Agile stuff. So we were just figuring out. We weren't doing good Agile things at that time, but we were trying. We started figuring some stuff out together. This company was quite the disaster, a roller coaster. The first year I was there, the company had about 50 people and 100% turnover. So I really built up my network, right? I was like, all of a sudden, the first job I had 5 years and it was only 20 people. I didn't really build a whole lot of network. And then this job, all of a sudden, I met 100 new people in a year, right? I was like, all right, I started networking. This is good. And so, but if I think about back then, me as a leader, I would call it kind of like I was still orchestrating, but I wasn't the expert. I wasn't like the most technical person, like the most technical on our product. And so I was relying on the team, which was good, right? It made me a better leader, that I couldn't tell everybody how to do all the things. But where I was in the middle of everything was, what are the priorities? What should we do, right? What's the focus? And so working with all the people that were the demand side, wanting the team to do work, everybody's demanding from me. I got this nickname from my team, which was the javelin catcher. Think about that. Because this place, I said, was a little bit of a roller coaster. There was definitely some toxic things happening politically at the executive level and others. And I realized my job was protecting the team from all of that noise, right? There's all this craziness happening over there. Don't pay attention to that. Here's what we need to do. Here's what we need to focus on. Let's just stick to that. And we had a great team and a great dynamic and kind of that great subculture, if you will, even though all this kind of craziness stuff was happening over there. So I became this orchestrator, this protector of the team in this role. And then we go to kind of the next leadership level where I feel like this next company, I was there for 5 years. And fun fact, not so fun at the time, but in 5 years, I averaged a new boss a quarter. You can do that math, right? It's late in the day, I know, but I learned a lot of different leadership styles. Not all that good of leadership styles. That's why they didn't last in those jobs very much. I had a lot of opportunity to move up. I started with just a contract development gig because I came out of that other roller coaster and somebody said, hey, why don't you just want to go code for a little while? I was like, that sounds wonderful. I did that for 3 months and then took on a full-time job as a manager and then was a director and then was a leader of other managers and then eventually got on the executive team at this company. So this is where I would say one of my biggest leadership growth was over this 5-year period. And one luxury that I had was I was able to hire many of the developers from the previous company where we started our Agile journey together. We didn't have it all figured out, right? But a lot of those folks came into this company, and we continued our journey. Around this time was when I read Mike Cohn's Agile Estimating and Planning book. Anybody read that one? This is an oldie, but that was the first time. Like there wasn't a lot of books on. Like now we have Scaled Agile Framework and all this stuff and Less and Nexus and a bazillion books on things. But this book was the first one where it's like, oh, I can see how we can do more than just team level Scrum events, but think about how do we plan, how do we estimate, how do we take project requests and turn them into something that we can manage, right? And so we did that Agile Estimating Planning, and then I'm going to move this down a little bit because it's clicking a little bit. Where's Scott? Is Scott in here or is he still at the front desk? So Scott Killen, you might not know this, but Scott founded Agile Austin. Scott's the reason we're all here today. And around this time was one of the first workshops. We talk about all the SIGs that we do and all this stuff. At that time, we had like a workshop series. I think Colin was in here earlier too. I think he helped organize that for a little while. And I remember that was the first time I ever got training in Agile, was an Agile Austin event. So I have a lot to give, got a lot of, from this community, a lot to give back to this community. And so this is where we started to figure out, okay, how can this stuff work? And then I was like, we need to get everybody trained. Right? Like it's one thing for me to learn this stuff, but like we need to get our whole team trained. So I called the guy that did the workshop. His business partner ended up coming down, a guy named Robin Diamond. And we did a 2-day class, and he came a day early and a day after. So he was there for kind of like a week. And I told him coming into it, I remember saying, hey, our teams are actually doing all the kind of practices. And we're actually doing, like we had physical boards, we had Post-its on the wall. This is, y'all like to complain about Jira. There was no Jira. There was no tools to manage this stuff. We put index cards or Post-its on a wall, right? And we huddled around that wall every day. And so we were doing a lot of pretty good things when I look back at it. But the one thing I remember telling Robin, I was like, the biggest thing I need your help with is our teams are not self-organizing. You ever run into this where Your teams aren't really taking ownership, or the Scrum Master is doing all of the talking, or the manager is still highly involved. And I was like, we need help with self-organizing. He said, okay, all right, we'll come down and we'll help you. We did this class, and I remember walking out the door the fourth day. So after the 2 days of training, we're going to lunch, the management team and Robin, and I remember asking him, so you've been here for 4 days, like, what do you think of what's our problem with self-organizing? And he said, you guys need to stop. And I go, what are you talking about? And he said, you guys were asking a lot of questions in class. That's great. You guys being the leaders. Myself and the management team, we were the ones most curious. We were the ones asking, how does this work? How do you do that? How do you do this? And we were asking because we were going to try and help our teams to do those things, right? But he's like, you guys got to let go. You've got to create space for your teams to be able to take ownership. If you don't create space for them, they're going to just keep letting you, almost out of respect, right? You think about that. Oh, you're the boss, you're the leader. Out of respect, I'm going to let you keep telling us what to do. But also that means we're the only ones accountable if it's the right thing or the wrong thing. Or we've got to be perfect in our communication on how it needs to be implemented, because if it's not implemented right, it's still going to be our problem. So the biggest thing in the way of us getting a self-organizing team were the leaders themselves. So that was my lesson number one, big lesson that I started to learn, is going, all right, I got to shut up more. Max, where are you? Oh, there he is, okay. And so like I needed to create space for the team, and our whole leadership team did. So that was one of our big lessons. And then this was like one of the most freeing moments for me as a leader, was when I realized what working in an agile way truly unlocked for me when working with the business stakeholders, the rest of the organization. Have you ever been blamed for why something didn't get done on time? Why it didn't have all the scope, right? Why isn't the product working the way it's supposed to be working? All these kinds of things. And the reality is, what we traditionally have done before we have truly agile teams or truly predictable agile teams, I saw a bunch of Post-its on the predictability outcome out there, is that what I used to do, I'll say, is I used to go to a stakeholder and say, what do you need us to work on over the next quarter? Okay, got it. All right, what do you need us to work on the next quarter? Okay, got it. What do you need to work on the next quarter? All right, and I gather all this kind of input. And then I would go figure out what it is that we're going to do. And I'd come back and say, okay, here's our plan on how we're going to get everything done, or most everything. And then what do you think would happen in 3 months? Do you think I delivered everything? Probably not, because at that time we were I would say Wagile. Like our teams were doing Scrum well, but we still were planning in a waterfall-y kind of way, like trying to lock in the scope and do that stuff. But then our team started to, in this scenario, they were estimating in story points. They were starting to get a predictable velocity, and it allowed us to be able to say, all right, we don't know exactly what we're going to deliver, but we can get 100 points done this sprint. And at the point when I realized, all right, we're predictable. My job as a technology manager is to build a team that can get a lot done, can go fast with quality, right? It's not my job to say what we're going to work on, right? That's their job. But I was taking all of that input. I call this the divide and conquer prioritization technique. Not a good one, right? What I started to do with this data was say, look, we're predictable. We can get 20 points done every 2 weeks. We've been able to do that for the last 6 months. We can get 100 points done over the next 5 sprints. What should we get done in the next 5 sprints? And make these 3 people, I call it cage fight prioritization. Facilitated cage fight, right? So we put them in a room and we say, y'all have 100 points. What are the top 100 points? I know you think your thing's priority number one, and I think you think yours is priority number one, and your thing's priority one. Around this time was also when I read Patrick Lencioni's book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Definitely recommend that one. And he talked about your first team. And so these 3 leaders in our organizations mostly are only worried about their hierarchy of the organization. VP of sales, VP of marketing, VP of operations. And I forced those 3 to make decisions on what's the best thing for the business. The whole business, not sales, not marketing, not operations. What's the best thing for the whole business? And at that point, it's like, if y'all pick the wrong things, that's on y'all. That's not my decision anymore. My job is to say, with predictability, how much can we get done, and then go predictably deliver 100 points worth of work. What is the work that we're going to do? Y'all prioritize. And at that point, I got out of the middle. I wasn't going to be blamed for working on the wrong thing anymore. Then there was a time where I took over a new product. And this company was an e-discovery company, and so our products were mostly used internally. So e-discovery being like, there's a lawsuit, and we need to look at all the emails to figure out what did he said, she said, whatever. And we would take backup tapes, and try and recover all the data, recover like the Outlook file, and then make it all searchable. And there was a business partner. Well, I wouldn't say at this point he was a partner. I would say a business adversary. That was because the person that I had to start working with, his name was Chris, he was pissed. He was not happy. He was frustrated. He was mad. Because his ability to deliver was dependent on us getting a product done, and the last releases always under-delivered. And so I was like, all right, Chris, I'm new here. I get that the last people were really bad. All right, I'm here to try and fix this. Let me understand. So how did you communicate priorities for this last release that went for like 6 months and didn't deliver him everything that he wanted? He said, well, I sat down with the technology team and I went over all the things that I wanted, and they came back and said, say it was I need these 20 things, and they came back and said, we're going to deliver these 40 things, your 20 things and these 20 other things. And he's like, and I didn't really want those other 20 things, but they said they were going to get all my stuff. So I was like, cool, in 6 months, you're going to get me my 20 things? Yep, okay. And then they came back and they had only delivered like 30 things, and they delivered like 15 of the things he didn't care about and only 5 of the things that he wanted. And I was like, well, Chris, why didn't you make a bigger deal about the features you didn't want? He's like, well, they told me they'd give me my features. So I didn't really care if they wanted to build this other stuff, but nobody's going to use that stuff. So here, he was just not getting what he wanted, and he wasn't really involved like in that scenario of being able to prioritize. He was just saying, here's my demand, and you're going to deliver it? Okay. So we did something radical. We said, all right, Chris, we're going to work in an agile way, and we're going to work in 1-week sprints. He's like, I don't know what a sprint is, but okay. He didn't have any trust for us, but I was like, all right. And we're going to meet with you on Monday, and we're going to deliver on Friday whatever we talked about that you said was your priority. He said, sure you are. Right? He didn't believe us. And then we did it. And then he was like, okay. He was a little more, all right, curious, but skeptical. And then I said, we're going to meet with you Monday again, and you're going to prioritize, and we're going to work on whatever you say to work on. And we're going to deliver it. And then we did. And we worked in a predictable way. We did that for about 6 weeks, 1-week sprints. I don't recommend long-term, often 1-week sprints. But from a building trust, It was like, you get to hold the steering wheel. We're going to give you a car that's going really fast. You get to turn it and tell us where we're going to go, right? My job is to give you the steering wheel. My job is to give you a fuel gauge to say, hey, we can get 60 points done over this period of time, whatever that might be. He was the one making the call on what we were going to do. We showed it to him. We got feedback loops. We weren't at a point yet where week one it went to production. We weren't in a continuous delivery world yet, but we did get feedback, and that did inform our next week. And that's what, now all of a sudden Chris and I were buddies, right? Because we were there to now joined at the hip. Like, I wasn't going to be successful if he wasn't successful. He wasn't going to be successful unless I was successful. But now it was, hey, Chris, what do you want us to do next quarter? Chris, what do you want us to do next month? What do you want us to work on the backlog? We're going to do it with quality. We're going to do it in a predictable way. That's our job. So then the last lesson that big lesson I learned at this organization was when I became a leader of leaders or manager of managers. Right? Think about as a frontline manager, do you get to set your own task list? Do you come in on Monday and go, these are the 5 things I'm going to do this week, and nobody's going to interrupt me all week? Is that how your day usually goes? Or it's like you come in with good intentions, and you're like, all right, these are the things I want to get done this day, and 5 minutes after you walk in the door or turn on Zoom, all of a sudden, it's game over. Like, you're not going to get done any of the things that you wanted to do. All day is going to be reacting to this email, this Slack, this person complaining, whatever's happening, and then about 5 or 6 o'clock, that's going to start slowing down, and then if you got to get some stuff done of your own, then all of a sudden now you're doing that while you're watching The Bachelorette, right? That's what you watch, right? No. Right, so we operate most of the time as that frontline leader as in what I call a reactive mode. We're just reacting to all the things. We're triaging. Hey, this needs to go to here. Oh, that, I'm routing, I'm sending things, I'm forwarding this email, I'm setting up this meeting, I'm doing all that stuff. And then all of a sudden, when I became a manager of managers, I was like, well, the frontline managers are doing all that, and well, what do I do? I was like, I don't have a list. Like, the list isn't coming to me. Like, there's a certain point when you're that frontline manager, you give up on creating your own list because you're like, I don't need to plan anything this week that I'm going to work on because it's all going to come to me, right? And it does. And it keeps you busy. And it's important to keep all those things moving. But then all of a sudden, as the director, I was like, I don't have a list. And then I was like, oh, let me change that around. I get to create a list. I'm supposed to create a list. But it's like booting into a new operating system. It's like I gotta shut down everything and like boot up into this new mode to be strategic. I'm not tactical anymore. I'm like, all right, I'm a strategic thinker about like, what is it that we should be doing? What should be our objectives at a high level? What is important for us to do? What could we start to maybe optimize or improve across the organization? And this is when I realized my job as a more strategic leader is to work across the organization, work with my partner, Chris, work with other leaders of testing or architecture about our vision or infrastructure to try and optimize what's happening. And then if I'm coming up with kind of things that I'm doing or I'm trying to influence initiatives that others are going to do, then I've got to change my communication style because it's not about, hey, we need to do this task or we need to do this task, because now I'm delegating to potentially a group. I'm delegating ownership. I need to make sure I'm communicating clear vision, clear success criteria, right? That becomes what's the outcome that we're trying to go for, because I'm not close to the problem. I'm not on the front line. I don't know the exact solution. So I've got to be able to articulate, here's the problem we're trying to solve. Here's the vision of what an outcome could be or what the impact might be or how we'll measure success. And then, again, get kind of out of the way of the team and say, hey, let me know how I can support you. But y'all got it? Y'all understand? We'll check in. We'll do sprint reviews or other things, right? But that's this shifting as we start to become more of a strategic leader. How do we be more proactive versus reactive? And then I stumbled into this career as an Agile coach. Y'all heard about these people? They're crazy. Whew. Why are you laughing so hard, Eric? All right, he's biting his tongue over there. And so, actually, I did stumble into it. I picked up this other contract gig after that last crazy roller coaster of, 25 bosses in 5 years. And there was a company, anybody remember Wayport? Was a startup about 10 years to 12 years ago. They got bought by AT&T, and they were providing all the Wi-Fi for Starbucks, McDonald's, Hilton. So if it didn't work, I can tell you why. And they were saying, we're Agile, we just need some help scaling, because now we're part of AT&T. We got to do big plans and big budgets and stuff like that. And we're using Jira. Does anybody remember what Agile and Jira looked like 12 years ago? Was it Greenhopper? Wasn't that some guy built in his garage, right? And it was like this bolt-on to an issue. If you're ever struggling with why Jira isn't maybe the best, it was an issue tracking software. That should explain a lot, right? Like it was a bug tracking software that then they bolted on all this other stuff onto, and the underlying model is still kind of the core thing. But that's what we were dealing with back then. And I get in there, and I'm like, y'all aren't very agile. Like, y'all think you're agile, but you are not very agile. And I had seen at that last company, we got some really hyper-productive agile teams. So I had seen 100-mile-an-hour agile, and I'm like, y'all are like 20-mile-an-hour agile. And I put together this spreadsheet. I actually pulled it. I didn't put it in here, but I actually went and found it. I was talking to somebody about what I was going to talk about, and I was like, I think I could find it. I found this spreadsheet. It's one pager that said, here's what I've observed. Here's what you could be doing better. Here's what the impact would be from a business perspective if we did that. And they said, okay, go do that. And I go, okay. And so I was like, just started helping him. I thought I was just going to go back to a leadership role in another company. And about 6 months into that, this is 2010, I go, you know what? I'm not half bad at this, and this is kind of fun. Maybe I could build a business around this. Remember that pursuit I had from high school? I'd been trying to find, like, what's the thing I could build a business around? I was like, I think I could build a business around this. I think there's a lot of companies around town that could use this kind of help, and I kind of like doing this. You know what? One of the reasons why I liked doing it was I was like, I live in Cedar Park. I lived in Cedar Park then, and AT&T's offices were off of Ben White, south. I was in the car. 183 highway wasn't all the way done. Like somewhere in that time period is when the tollway finally, and so I'm driving 45 minutes in the car every day, and I was like, you know what? On the way home, I'm going, this company has a lot of problems, but the good news is they're not mine, right? And I realized one day, I was like, my problems are agile velocity problems, like building a business, building a company. My problems are not the problems of the client, right? The client's got to go fix those. I can hold up a mirror as much as I want, but I get to go home, and I don't have to deal with them. I was like, that's kind of cool. I don't have to deal with that stuff. And I can go create whatever culture I want in Agile Velocity, because one of my selfish missions of starting Agile Velocity was to never work for somebody else ever again. Think about my story so far, right? Like I was like, I've seen a lot of people, I don't want to work for them. I think I can do better than that. At least those problems will be my problems, right? It'll be my mess, right, that I'm having to deal with. So the other cool thing was some of the first employees that we hired at Agile Velocity were some of those same people that were at that prior company, right, that we brought on. Now, in the beginning, we did all sorts of things. We were like, what will people in Austin pay us to do? So we were like Agile coaching, Agile training, staffing, development, virtual CTO. It's like, we're just going to try all those things. And if you think about it, we're like, let's just run a bunch of experiments, see what things, and eventually there were times when we go, you know what, we're doing $1 million of staffing a year, but we're going to stop doing that because we don't really love doing that. We're not unique about that. Here's something more we can specialize in. We kept doing that, and we got more and more centered around what is the thing that really differentiates us and that we really enjoy doing and we think we're most effective in. But one of the hardest things being kind of that high, as you get into the higher level leader, you're no longer the expert. And sometimes you feel like you're not the expert in anything, right? You're like, I'm not an expert in marketing. I'm not an expert in sales. I'm not an expert in operations and finance and all of these things. And the hardest thing to do is not only, is like, how do I hire? All right, you're like, we need to hire somebody to head sales. Okay, you're interviewing for that. How do I know if you're any good at sales? How do I hire for somebody that's great at sales? How do I hire for somebody that's great at marketing? How do I even know what we need? And so certain times when it was things like, I just needed to go do it. To not be the expert, but to have enough awareness of like the right questions to ask, the right direction to provide. And so I encourage you, one of our clients is Southwest Airlines, and they do this really well. They encourage people to move around the company, which at times looks like it's disruptive. But what they're doing is investing in their leaders. And we just had one of our key sponsors on technology move into the business. We've had one of our sponsors move from the Southwest.com side of things to the reservation system. Right? And they're moving around a lot and gaining new skills. Could be for some of you, like the first time I was a dev manager, and then all of a sudden I have testers, or I have a scrum master, or I have a product owner. And so I encourage you to think about what can you do to get some of those other experiences on your journey of leadership growth, as opposed to all of a sudden you're thrust in the job and you're like, I don't know what all the things are. How do I figure that out? So kind of invest in what you can do to kind of grow. This is one of my favorite ones or maybe not so favorite, but like as a leader, is that I like puzzles. I like challenges. I'm a problem solver. Like most people that came out of technology, you're analytical, you're a problem solver. And a lot of times your people are going to bring you something. They're going to say, we have this problem. What should we do? It's a trap. Right? Anybody get like the Star Wars reference there? Yeah. It's a trap. It's a trap. Right? All of a sudden they're saying there's a problem, and you're like, oh, a problem. I love problems. Oh, let's work on this. What is it? What is it going on? All right. Hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And the next thing you know, you're like, oh, they just set a trap for me. That they're trying to get me to figure everything out. Am I the best equipped to solve this problem? I'm the furthest removed from the problem. That person has way more information, and I am not going to be able to gather all the details from them. So around this time is when I read the book, Turn This Ship Around by David Marquet. And in there he talks about this notion of intent-based leadership. So he took over this submarine that he had no idea, he wasn't supposed to, but he took it over and he had no idea how it worked. He almost killed the crew. And he realized, he's like, all right, I need to not try and solve the problems or tell people exact orders. And how this works is to say, don't bring me a problem. And you've probably heard people, don't bring me a problem, bring me solutions. Well, that's not that constructive. So what it was it's more of a framework of saying, hey, there was this problem. Here are the options that we considered. Here's my recommendation, and here's why it's my recommendation. And the idea is, if we can get to the point where there's enough context and there's enough thought that that person's doing, my job becomes really easy, because it should just be, I concur. Or maybe it's just, hey, tell me a little bit more about that. Or tell me about some of the other options that you considered, or whatnot. But then, like, okay, great. Now, where's ownership of solving that? It's not with me anymore, right? But if you came and brought me a problem, and I said, oh, go try this. And people are like, oh, I don't think that's going to work, but he's the boss. And then it doesn't work. Could not work because they didn't really understand what I was saying to do. Could be because it's a dumb idea. Could be all those different things. But then ownership is here. Blame is here. Accountability is here. It shouldn't be with me. Right? So we got to switch to this more intent-based leadership. And then another trap that's kind of set for us a lot of times is, what's the priority of that? Hey, can you tell me, what's the priority? How do I prioritize that? It's like, I don't know. I don't know all the other options. I don't have the full backlog in front of me. I cannot prioritize one thing without context of all the other things we could do. Should we spend money on that? Maybe. What other things will we not be able to do if we do that? You're not giving me that whole list? Then I cannot tell you what the priority of any one thing is. Is it a good idea? Seems like a good idea. Is it the best idea? No idea. Right? And so, but I get that leaders need to provide clearer priorities. You ever complained about that before? You ever been under that? Our leaders need to provide. Actually, I would say leaders need to provide clear vision, clear outcomes, clear success criteria, and they need to enable our people to make better priority decisions. How do they juggle their time? When you get a CEO title, whenever you say something to somebody, you're like, hey, I had this idea. What did that just get translated to? Okay, I'll stop what I'm doing. I'll go work on that. No. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying here's an idea for your backlog. And especially when you're CEO, you're communicating to like marketing or sales or operations, right? You're not communicating to necessarily one person. You're saying, hey, I had this idea for operations that we could do. You're the one closest to the problem. You've got to figure out where that fits within your priorities, but we've got to agree on clarity around what are objectives, what are our outcomes, what is the vision, what are we trying to do? And then there's one other really big key. We've got to have radical transparency in the organization for you to be armed with the information to make good decisions. That was something that we did from day one at Agile Velocity, is everybody in the company knows how much money is in the bank or not. Everybody knows what the revenue numbers are. Everybody knows all of these. We had to teach everybody in the company how to read a P&L. Because I would get the question kind of similar to this. It's like, well, what's the budget for marketing this year? And I'd say, we don't have one. Well, how do I know how much to spend? You need to make good priority decisions. And you need to be aware of where we are financially or where we are organizationally or what we're trying to do. You might come back with, hey, I propose that we sponsor Keep Austin Agile this year for these reasons, right? And this is the other things that we might not be able to get to, right? Okay, I concur. Right? Scott came to us and said, hey, you've done lanyards before. Can you do lanyards? Right? Did I have to approve that expense? No. Right? Vic and Rachel decided, hey, is that a worthwhile thing to do from a marketing perspective? Do it. Right? That's how we move with agility. That's how we move fast. We call that decision agility. How do we work in that way? And to wrap this up, you heard about this thing called COVID. You think that might have been that was disruptive for your organization, it's disruptive for ours. And it forced us to kind of rethink a little bit about, it was kind of around our 10-year anniversary of Agile Velocity. And so I had to do some thinking with my owner hat on, right? Not just the leader hat, but the owner hat. What are we going to do? And I realized a couple of things. One, I had achieved my bucket list item for my career and my life. My job, I wanted to create a business. I wanted to do this thing ever since high school, and I had. And it was successful, and it was sustaining. And I was like, for 10 years, Agile Velocity was a vehicle for me to accomplish my life mission of being a CEO, being a leader, proving that I could do that, learning how to do that. And I realized I had done it. And so it was like, as we re-envisioned, we call it AV 2.0, as we re-envisioned how do we want to operate now, I realized my job isn't about fulfilling a need that I had anymore as a leader, but it was about creating an environment for all the people within it to thrive and to grow. And that's a whole different level of kind of leadership, isn't it? To say like, hey, I'm here to create space, I'm here to create vision, I'm here to help, but now we have no bosses, we have no hierarchy, we have no managers, we have a lot of leaders. And how do we do that? We've had to figure out new structures, and we're continuing to figure out new ways. Like, how does that work? Some of you are like, that can't work. But we're figuring out, how does that work? Is it bumpy? Sure. But that's really where we are now. And so I encourage you to think about, in your journey, right? Like these are lessons I've learned, I continue to relearn. And I would say, what I learned most is that leadership is a continuous journey, right? It's not, hey, I got there, I'm done. It's something that we continue to strive for, continue to pursue. What is that next thing? What is that next level? That's my story. Thanks a lot.